Every civilization you have ever studied, every textbook you have ever trusted, every timeline historians have ever handed you, all of it rests on one foundational assumption. That assumption is this: human beings only became capable of extraordinary things after they learned to farm, after they built cities, after they developed writing and trade and organized religion. That is the story. That has always been the story. But in a single dusty hillside in southeastern Turkey, that story doesn't just crack, it collapses entirely. And the most disturbing part? The people who knew this earliest kept it quiet for decades. This is what they didn't tell you about Göbekli Tepe. There is a place on this earth where the ground itself is a confession. Not of sin, not of war, but of something far more unsettling, the confession that everything we thought we knew about the origins of human civilization is built on a foundation that is crumbling in real time. That place is called Göbekli Tepe. Translated from Turkish, the name means Potbelly Hill. It sits on a windswept ridge in southeastern Turkey, roughly 25 miles from the Syrian border, baking under a brutal sun that bleaches everything around it the color of old bone. Most people who drive past it have no idea what lies beneath the surface, and for a long time, neither did the academic world. Here is what the textbooks told us for generations. Human beings began as hunter-gatherers, nomadic, scattered, survival-focused. They followed animals. They ate what the land gave them. They lived in small, fragile groups and moved constantly because they had no choice. Then, somewhere around 10,000 years ago, something shifted. Humans discovered agriculture. They planted seeds, domesticated animals, and slowly, very slowly began to settle. Settlements became villages, villages became cities, cities developed religion and art and architecture and all the machinery of what we call civilization. That was the accepted sequence. That was the rule book. Religion, art, monumental construction. These were products of civilization, not the causes of it. Göbekli Tepe does not just challenge that sequence, it detonates it. Dating back approximately 11,000 to 12,000 years, Göbekli Tepe sits at the dawn of the Neolithic era. This makes it older than Stonehenge by about 6,000 years, and older than the first known cities of Mesopotamia. Think about what that means. When the people who built Göbekli Tepe were setting their enormous limestone pillars upright and carving their intricate animal reliefs, the pyramids of Giza were still 8,000 years in the future. The wheel had not been invented. Writing did not exist. Agriculture, according to the old model, had barely begun. And yet here stood a complex of monumental architecture so sophisticated, so deliberately planned, so geometrically precise, that it demanded organized labor, surplus resources, symbolic thinking, and long-range social coordination, all of it at once, 12,000 years ago. But here is where it gets worse. Göbekli Tepe was built in the pre-Neolithic age, when humans were hunter-gatherers living a nomadic lifestyle and moving in small groups. Building Göbekli Tepe would have required workers to settle in one place during its construction. Think about the magnitude of that statement. We're not talking about a campfire. We are not talking about a pile of stones someone arranged in a vague circle. The site consists of multiple enclosures, each centered around two large T-shaped limestone pillars, some reaching heights of 20 feet and weighing several tons. These pillars are adorned with elaborate carvings of animals such as foxes, snakes, boars, and birds, as well as abstract symbols. Some of the individual stones weigh up to 50 tons, quarried, transported, shaped, raised, and decorated by people who, according to conventional history, were not supposed to be capable of any of this. And this is where everything changes. Because the question is not just how they built it. The question, the one that keeps serious researchers awake at night, is why. Why would people who had no permanent homes, no agriculture, no cities, no writing system, no pottery in any significant form, why would they dedicate the kind of sustained, organized effort required to build something on this scale? What were they doing here? What were they protecting? What did they know? And perhaps, most critically, who were they, really? The site was discovered properly in 1994. A 1963 survey had dismissed it as a medieval cemetery, one of archaeology's great embarrassments. Let that sink in. A survey team visited this hill in 1963, looked at what was emerging from the ground, and concluded it was nothing important. Medieval, they said. Move on. So the world moved on. For 30 years, one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history sat in the ground, ignored, misclassified, buried under bureaucratic indifference and the bias of a field that had already decided what ancient history was supposed to look like. Then came Klaus Schmidt. In 1994, the late German archaeologist visited the site and immediately understood that what lay beneath this hill was unlike anything ever found before. Schmidt began excavations in 1994. The Neolithic site contains a series of elaborate circular enclosures constructed of massive T-shaped limestone columns, many featuring intricate carvings of abstract symbols and wild animals, including lions, foxes, gazelles, and birds. Schmidt devoted the rest of his life to this site, leading excavations until his death in 2014. And in that time, what began to emerge from the earth fundamentally destabilized the academic consensus about when and why civilization began. But the most critical thing to understand is this. Excavation at Göbekli Tepe is not finished, not even close. About 90% of the site remains unexcavated. Archaeologists estimate 150 or more years of work remain. At least 15 more enclosures lie buried. One may date back to 15,000 BCE. Read that again, 15,000 BCE. That is not a typo. That is 5,000 years before the structures we already know about. If that turns out to be confirmed and informed sources suggest the evidence is pointing that direction, then we're not looking at a site that challenges our understanding of civilization. We're looking at a site that obliterates the entire framework. And this is where the story stops being a mystery and starts being something far more deliberate. Because there is something that the mainstream narrative has consistently glossed over, something that archaeologists argued about in hushed academic language for years before it finally became impossible to ignore. Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned. It was not buried by a flood. It was not covered over by centuries of accumulated windblown soil and forgotten debris. It is reasonable to infer that Göbekli Tepe was not buried by natural inundation, but rather by deliberate manual effort, shovel toss by shovel toss, stone by stone, brought from below, not above. Someone buried it on purpose. Someone took enormous pains, invested enormous labor, and methodically covered this entire complex with fill material, sealing it beneath the earth, as if placing it in a vault. Think about what that means. The people who built this place, who carved these pillars, who organized the labor, who developed the symbolic vocabulary encoded in every animal relief, those people, or their descendants, or another group entirely, at some point made a conscious decision to bury the whole thing. Why? What were they hiding it from? Were they preserving it? Were they ending its function through ritual closure? Were they sealing something inside? Or, and this is the possibility that no one in the academic establishment seems eager to pursue publicly, were they sending a message? A message encoded not in writing, because writing didn't exist yet, but in stone and symbol and astronomical alignment, meant to survive long enough for someone, someday, to dig it up and understand. Now we arrive at the stone that changes everything. Pillar 43, the vulture stone. When people first hear about Göbekli Tepe, they often focus on its age. When they stand at the site, they notice the pillars. But when they begin looking more closely, one carving almost always takes over the conversation. Pillar 43, better known as the vulture stone. It is the image that seems to demand interpretation. It is dense, deliberate, and unsettling. When you look at Pillar 43 for the first time, there is an immediate and visceral sense that you are looking at something that was made to communicate. Not to decorate, not to beautify, to communicate, specifically, precisely, urgently. The pillar's face is dominated by a large vulture, wings spread, with a round disc or sphere balanced on one wing. Below the vulture, a headless human figure appears a body without a head. Surrounding these central figures is a menagerie of other animals carved in relief. A scorpion with its tail raised, a snake, a crane-like bird, and several smaller creatures. Across the top of the pillar runs a row of handbag-like shapes, rectangular containers with curved handles that appear on carved stones at other sites around the world, from ancient Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. Stop there. Handbag-like shapes. Appearing at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and in ancient Mesopotamia and in Mesoamerica, across thousands of miles and thousands of years, the same symbol, the same shape, repeated in cultures that, by every accepted account, had absolutely no contact with each other. This is not coincidence. This is not parallel evolution. Something connects these cultures, and whatever that connection is, it is older and more expansive than anything our current model of human history allows for. But let us return to Pillar 43. Because the real revelation is what the carvings may actually be saying. When you overlay the carvings with the night sky as it appeared above southeast Turkey in 10,950 BCE, the match is uncanny. The vulture corresponds to the constellation we now call Cygnus. The scorpion lines up with Scorpius. Other symbols mark the exact positions of stars that have since drifted due to precession of the equinoxes. Pillar 43 isn't just art. It appears to be a star map frozen in stone, recording the sky as it looked the very year the younger Dryas comet swarm slammed into Earth and triggered a 1,000-year global winter. Let that land. A 1,000-year global winter. Around 10,800 BCE, a comet impact, or a series of impacts, struck the Earth with enough force to trigger a catastrophic climate event called the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plummeted, Ecosystems collapsed, ice sheets advanced, megafauna went extinct, rivers of meltwater flooded coastlines and reshaped entire continents. It was, by every scientific measure, one of the most catastrophic events in post-Ice Age human history. And someone, standing in southeastern Turkey 11,000 years ago, carved a record of it into stone with such astronomical precision that modern researchers, using computer software to recreate the night sky of that exact period, can look at Pillar 43 and say, yes, this matches. This is the date. This is the sky. This is the event. In 2017, engineers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis of the University of Edinburgh published a provocative paper arguing that the animals on Pillar 43 represent constellations, and that the entire scene records a catastrophic comet impact that triggered the Younger Dryas cold period around 10,800 BCE. Their analysis mapped the vulture to the constellation Sagittarius, the scorpion to Scorpius, and other animals to recognizable star patterns. The disk held by the central vulture, they argued, represents the sun at the summer solstice, pinpointing a specific date in the sky. And if this interpretation is correct, and a growing body of independent research suggests it may be, then Göbekli Tepe is not a temple in the way we casually use that word. It is a record, a memorial, a warning, built by survivors. For survivors, encoding the most catastrophic event in living memory into stone, so permanent, so unmistakable, that it could survive the collapse of whatever civilization came before. Because here is the part the mainstream narrative refuses to confront directly. The Younger Dryas impact event around 10,800 BCE did not just trigger a climate catastrophe. It interrupted something. Whatever level of human organization, whatever degree of accumulated knowledge, whatever form of civilization existed before that comet or comet swarm struck the Earth, it was effectively reset. The world that came after was not a continuation. It was a beginning again. And Göbekli Tepe, built in the centuries immediately following that reset, may be the most direct physical evidence we have that the reset happened and that someone survived it with enough knowledge, enough organization, and enough foresight to build a monument designed to outlast everything else. And then they buried it, they sealed it underground, and they walked away. Now, consider what recent excavation seasons have uncovered, because the site is not finished speaking. One of the most notable discoveries during the 2025 season was a human statue featuring clearly defined head and torso characteristics. It was unearthed between enclosures B and D, drawing widespread attention from the global archaeological community. This matters enormously. For years, Göbekli Tepe's carved imagery was dominated by animals, foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, birds. Human figures appeared, but they were marginal, often headless, depicted in relation to the animal imagery rather than at the center of it. A clearly defined human statue with recognizable anatomical features suggests a new layer of symbolic or social communication happening at the site. Someone here was important enough to be depicted as a person, not just as an abstract figure or a symbolic element. Who was this individual? A priest? A leader? A memory of a specific human being preserved in stone? The questions are multiplying faster than the answers. Recent excavations have revealed tools, grinding stones, and plant and animal remains, indicating that people may have lived or stayed at Göbekli Tepe for extended periods. The findings suggest early humans may have started building permanent settlements earlier than previously thought. This directly contradicts the long-held narrative that Göbekli Tepe was a purely ceremonial site, a place people visited for rituals and then departed from, returning to their nomadic lives. The evidence of grinding stones, of food processing, of extended habitation paints a very different picture. People were living here. Or at minimum, they were staying long enough that they needed to produce food on site. And if that is true, then Göbekli Tepe was not just a place where civilization performed its rituals. It may be a place where civilization actually began. Dr. Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh has suggested that the site could be the world's oldest calendar, arguing its builders were keen observers of the sky and may have used the stone structures to track celestial events. An observatory, a calendar, a memorial to a comet strike, a record-keeping system for celestial cycles, a place of extended habitation, a religious center drawing visitors from 200 kilometers away, a deliberate vault sealed by its own builders. Göbekli Tepe is not one thing. It is all of these things simultaneously. And the fact that our existing categories temple, monument, observatory, settlement all apply at once, without any one of them being sufficient, tells you something profound. We do not have a category for what Göbekli Tepe actually is, because nothing like it was supposed to exist. And here is what the conspiracy theories, for all their sensationalism, are actually pointing at beneath the noise. Archaeologist accusations have included intentionally dragging their feet and hiding key discoveries about the site. Only a small percentage of the site has been dug up since excavations began in the mid-1990s. Now, it would be easy to dismiss this as fringe thinking, as paranoia, as the kind of breathless speculation that gets clicks, but not credibility. And to be clear, the accusation that archaeologists are deliberately hiding discoveries in some coordinated global conspiracy is almost certainly not the right frame. But the underlying frustration, the frustration at the pace of excavation, at the caution of institutional archaeology, at the way paradigm-breaking evidence gets absorbed slowly and reluctantly into the mainstream narrative, that frustration is pointing at something real. Here is what informed observers keep noting. Göbekli Tepe has been actively excavated for roughly 30 years. In that time, less than 10% of the site has been uncovered. We are told this is because of the need for careful, methodical excavation, for conservation of what is found, for the limitations of funding and personnel. All of that is true, but there is another dimension to the slowness that is less often discussed openly, and it has to do not with logistics, but with implications. Every new discovery at Göbekli Tepe creates problems, not physical problems, intellectual ones, problems for the established timeline, problems for the established sequence of human development, problems for the textbooks that teach millions of students every year that civilization began in Mesopotamia around 5000 BCE, built on the foundation of agriculture and writing and trade. Each shovel's worth of earth removed from this hillside has the potential to force a rewrite of chapters that took a century of scholarship to construct. And institutions, academic institutions, funding bodies, publishing networks are not always eager to accelerate the speed at which their own foundations are challenged. This is not a conspiracy. It is something more human and more troubling than a conspiracy. It is the weight of consensus, the institutional gravity of established ideas, the way that paradigm-breaking evidence gets absorbed at the pace that the existing paradigm can tolerate. Not the pace that the evidence itself demands, but the evidence keeps coming, and the pace is accelerating whether the institutions are ready or not. A new study suggests Göbekli Tepe's vulture stone may preserve a complex Neolithic system of timekeeping, cosmology, and ritual symbolism. The study looks for repeated patterns across several pillars and compares them with later symbolic systems in Eastern Europe. One of the study's most interesting observations concerns the repeated appearance of numerical patterns. Stele 43 contains 11 rectangular elements, while certain enclosures at Göbekli Tepe also include 11 T-shaped pillars. In one interpretation, this may refer to divisions of the year or sacred intervals between major solar events. 11. Repeating. In the pillars, in the carvings, in the structural layout. Is this coincidence? Or is this the earliest known example of encoded numerical information? A mathematical language built into architecture at a time when written language did not exist. If these ancient builders were encoding numerical patterns into the physical structure of the site, then they were not primitive. They were not simple. They were operating with a level of abstract cognition, with a mastery of symbolic representation that we have consistently underestimated because we looked at the date stamp on their civilization and assumed the capabilities that date implied. We assumed wrong. Now consider the broader picture, because Göbekli Tepe does not exist in isolation. It sits at the center of a web of questions that span every corner of the ancient world. The same handbag symbol found on its pillars appears in Sumerian carvings and in the sculptures of Mesoamerica. The same astronomical knowledge encoded in its structures appears echoed in ancient Egypt and ancient India, in the astronomical alignments of megalithic sites across Europe. The Younger Dryas impact event that Pillar 43 may be commemorating was a global catastrophe that affected every human population on Earth. If survivors built Göbekli Tepe to preserve a record of what happened, what stopped them from preserving that knowledge in other places too? What other sites, dismissed or misclassified or simply unexcavated, are sitting under the ground in other parts of the world, waiting for a Klaus Schmidt to recognize what they actually are? The implications extend beyond archaeology. Because if human beings were capable of this level of organized, symbolic, architecturally sophisticated activity 12,000 years ago before agriculture, before cities, before writing, then the question of what they were doing in the tens of thousands of years before that becomes uncomfortably open. Modern humans have existed in their current cognitive form for at least 300,000 years. The behavioral modernity that produces symbolic art, complex language, and social organization appears to go back at least 100,000 years. And yet for the vast majority of that time, we have been told that human beings were essentially treading water, surviving, but not creating, not building, not accumulating knowledge across generations in ways that left permanent records. Göbekli Tepe asks a different question. What if they were? What if the record simply hasn't survived? What if a comet or a series of catastrophes, a global winter, rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age that flooded vast coastal plains where populations were concentrated? What if these events erased civilizations the way a wave erases a drawing in sand, leaving only fragments, only hints, only a buried hilltop in Turkey that someone deliberately sealed before the world changed forever. What most analysts are not confronting directly is the possibility that Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of the story. It may be a late chapter, it may be a memorial, not just to a comet strike, but to an entire world that preceded it, a world we do not have names for, a world that left almost no trace except this: a hill of carved stones, systematically buried, precisely aligned with the stars, encoding numerical systems and astronomical knowledge and symbolic vocabularies that would not be matched again for thousands of years. And then, in 2025, the ground gave up something new, a human face, carved in stone, between two of the oldest enclosures on the site. A person, not an animal. A face that someone 12,000 years ago thought was important enough to preserve in limestone, to place in the center of this impossible complex, to leave for someone, somewhere in the unimaginable future, to find. Who was this person? What did they know? What were they trying to say? We do not know. And that uncertainty, that hovering weight of an almost answer, is the most honest thing that can be said about Göbekli Tepe in the year 2025. The site is generating new questions faster than it is generating answers. Every excavation season shifts the interpretation. Every new study of the vulture stone adds another layer of possibility. Every additional percentage point of the site that gets uncovered challenges the consensus that held for the previous decade. The sculptures and carvings reinforce the idea that spirituality played a major role in shaping early societies. The detailed artwork may provide insights into early belief systems, including creation myths and communal rituals. But here is what no mainstream outlet is saying clearly. The spiritual framework encoded at Göbekli Tepe predates every religion we know by thousands of years. Every major world religion, every mythology, every cosmological tradition that forms the intellectual and spiritual foundation of modern civilization, all of it is younger than this hilltop in Turkey. Which means that if Göbekli Tepe is encoding a belief system, a worldview, a cosmology, and every indication is that it is, then we are looking at the root. We are looking at the source code from which every subsequent spiritual tradition in human history was, in some sense, derived. And 90% of it is still in the ground. Think about what is buried out there. Think about what 15 more enclosures might contain. Think about what a structure potentially dating to 15,000 BCE would tell us if it were excavated and analyzed with the tools available to researchers right now. Think about what other pillars might be down there, carved with astronomical data, numerical patterns, symbolic languages that connect to traditions on the other side of the world. Think about what the human statue unearthed in 2025 might be the first of. Not the only human face, maybe the first in a series, maybe the beginning of something that, when fully uncovered, will make everything we currently believe about the origins of human identity and self-representation look like a footnote. The slow pace of excavation is not just a logistical issue, it is a choice. And what that choice costs us, every year that the ground remains undisturbed, is knowledge. Not abstract knowledge, urgent, foundational, civilization-defining knowledge about who we are, where we came from, what we survived, and what we were capable of before the catastrophe that reset the clock. There's one question that sits at the center of all of this, the one that researchers keep approaching from different angles without ever quite saying it directly. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe were sophisticated enough to build this, to carve this, to align this with the stars, to encode this with numerical patterns, to deliberately bury it as a form of preservation, then what happened to them? Where did this knowledge go? Where did they go? How does a civilization capable of all of this, a civilization that understood the stars, that could organize tens of thousands of hours of coordinated labor, that had developed a complex symbolic vocabulary that connects across continents, how does it simply disappear into the archaeological silence? The answer may be sitting in the remaining 90%, or it may already be on the surface, staring us in the face, carved into a stone we have been misreading for 30 years because we couldn't bring ourselves to accept what it was actually saying. This is not a mystery from the distant past. This is an active investigation. The site is open. The shovels are moving. The ground is still giving up what it has held for 12,000 years. And every answer it produces, every new chamber, every new pillar, every new carved face opens 10 more questions that our current frameworks cannot answer. What was lost? What was preserved? And what is still waiting, sealed under tons of deliberate fill in the dark beneath a dusty Turkish hillside for someone with the courage to go looking for it? The ground knows. It has always known. The question is whether we are finally ready to listen.